Like you had a really unique childhood. And I know that that's part of what you wrote about in your book. But I mean, do you have perspective now of kind of what that was like and the good that you were able to extract from it, and then also the things that maybe needed some reprogramming or new perception?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely had an unconventional upbringing for sure. Youngest of 5 kids growing up in Jersey. Yes, my father was a doctor and my mom was this very eccentric chef, which is a huge part of why I cook. I mean, she inspired me so much in the kitchen and, watching her, working on her tart flambe at 2:00 in the morning. And I'm like following her around the kitchen because that's the only time I could hang out with her, because she was not your typical mom. You know what I mean? Like, I've never been told to do my homework. I've never been given a rule in my life. And I think because of that, I was a really responsible kid because I had nothing to rebel against. Like, all my friends were rebelling and doing all this stuff because their parents put so many rules on them. And I was like, I don't have anything to rebel against, because my mom was just, a very eccentric person. And my father had the most amount of cases in 2 hospitals, which is like unheard of. So all he did was work. But yeah, my mom was a huge influence on me in the kitchen. And, it's interesting because, you asked, have I been able to kind of reflect on it, or what's my viewpoint of it now? The thing that's really interesting is, until I had kids, I had never fully dissected my upbringing. You know what I mean? Looked at it. Like, I have so many justifications of things that were like not okay growing up, just like period, like not cool. And I'm also not the type of person who blames. I'm just like, I always try to look at, okay, so how did I help cause this? And what can I take from this so this doesn't happen again?
That's so responsible.
Well, I try. I mean, I try. And I think because I was on my own at such a young age, like I left my house when I was 15 and I've been on my own since then. But
wow. When
I had kids, especially my first child being a girl, when I first had my daughter, it was, I had crazy postpartum anxiety. First of all, didn't even know what that was, because I didn't know anything about motherhood. So when the only thing that I basically heard about postpartum anything was like, you always hear about postpartum depression, because that's like in the, in the verbiage of things that mothers can suffer from. And I didn't have any of that, you know what I mean? But I had this overwhelming anxiety to protect this baby. And, I was living in the Lower East Side, and anytime like a siren would go up the street, I would think that I couldn't protect her. I would think it was like an attack on my family. I was having panic attacks and all this stuff. And that is not my personality. Like, that is so, I really do pride myself on being like the Rock of Gibraltar. I really do. Like, that's why I love directing. I love having a ton of responsibility and pressure and stress. And I'm like, I tend to do pretty well in those kinds of environments, like super high pressure type stuff. And I think that is one of the reasons why I love directing. It's one of the reasons why I love high stakes poker. And I used to be like obsessed with poker and all this, like, I mean, with your career, you must be the same way.
Well, I seek out discomfort. I've found that since I retired, I didn't feel like I used to be very adventurous. And then since I've retired now, I've like jumped out of helicopters, gone bungee jumping. I learned how to ski and snowboard and wake surf and like things that I wouldn't have otherwise done. Or saying yes to interviews or people or situations that I wouldn't have. And I realized that what I really like to do is I really like to put myself in an uncomfortable situation to push sort of the threshold and widen it. Like, I like to get into that, like, oh God, should I do this? Can I do this? To prove to myself that I can. I don't know if that you can relate to that, but I just like to be uncomfortable.
I can absolutely relate to that. And I used to put myself in situations like that as well. I totally get it. And to a point where I was like, when I was about to have my first kid, I was out with a friend of mine who was fully like about to have her baby. And I was still like only halfway through. pregnancy. And I'm like, what is the hardest thing? Like, what should I look out for? Because no one talks about the stuff that's really hard. And she was like, oh, no, she had just had her baby. And she was like, it feels like your heart is outside of your body and you're trying to make sure that nothing hurts this thing. And she's like, and it's just like your heart is outside walking around your body. And she's like, it's the most stressful thing you'll ever experience. And I'm like, I'm okay with stress. Like, I think I'm going to be okay with that. No.
The universe was like, Laura, let me just show you.
Exactly. For all the reasons we just said, like we put ourselves in these uncomfortable situations and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Nothing prepared me for giving birth, hearing that first squawk of my daughter just ripped through my entire being. And I woke up at like a mother, like I everything you could possibly imagine. Like I like in that moment, like I woke up and something inside of me woke up and I was so scared that I couldn't protect her. And so in those moments, you innately go back to what you know. So I innately would fall back on, okay, so how I was raised. So it was
Go back to work.
Right, exactly. It was the first time I like looked at how my mother raised me. You know what I mean? Because in that moment of like anxiety, you don't know what you're doing, you go right to what you know. It's like, professional athletes, you could speak to this with cars and everything, which by the way is incredible.
I watched you all the time when I lived in England racing on that 70s show. I mean, I was so grateful there was a cool show on because there's in England, I'm sure you've probably spent time there doing something.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
There's not a lot of channels. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so grateful there's like a cool show on. I've been a fan for a long time.
I think we met very briefly, like literally 20 years ago. Because I went to a race. I did this race and you were there. And of course, you were, I think, one of the only female race coach at the time. You were just paved the way for unbelievable what you did. And I remember meeting you then and being like, oh my God, this woman is just a complete badass.
Takes one to know one.
Maybe. Thank you. But I do remember that experience of being at a race and seeing you there, and it was very inspiring, and you were just, so thank you.
Oh God.
It's interesting. So when I looked back at how I was raised, it was the first time I was like, wow, that's actually, some of that stuff is not cool. Some of that stuff is,
I hear you,
not okay. And it was the first time I really had to come face to face with that. So in terms of what you're asking of, kind of my viewpoint on it now is I like to look at it and say, okay, great. I can now choose what I'm going to pass on to my kids and what to leave behind.